there's really no reports of these entities, these creatures attacking people. Now the rock throwing incident, do you consider that an attack on you, or was that something to maybe get you to leave?
I think it was intended to make me leave, to let me know, hey, I don't want you here.
And it worked.
Very much so. Very much so. Because after, like I said, when that rock hit the water, I immediately spun back to my, almost over my left shoulder at this point, and I yelled, WTF. I drew my handgun out of my holster and walked up the stone steps to where what would be the yard area of the cabin, and I yelled, I'm leaving. And I did not run, thinking if I run, will it chase me?
Right.
So I walked fast to my truck, started it. I explained to you, I walked to the back of my truck, looked around with the flashlight, got in the truck, and slung gravel all the way till I hit the blacktop. So there was one other case or incident that I had. I believe it was like 1981 or 1982 in southeast Missouri. I was, I think, about 12 years old at the time.
This is not the Reynolds County area. This is in an area.
No, this is south of Cape Girardeau, Missouri.
Which would be considerably east of Reynolds County.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, southeast of Reynolds.
Okay.
Yeah, it's southeast of Reynolds. But my uncle and I were catfishing. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. My uncle just happened to be in town on leave from the Navy, and we have family down in that area. And there's a local conservation lake and some forest area around that lake. Fished the lake for years since I was a little kid. To this day, I still fish at that lake. We were sitting on the bank catfishing by where the boat ramp was. We heard something come down the hillside and across the lake from us, which the only thing I could describe, it sounded like a cow coming down the hill. It sounded like something very large.
Okay.
My uncle and I just sat and listened and watched. Then we had a flashlight, wouldn't quite, it was a pretty strong light, but we were 75 yards from one side of the lake to the other, and it sounded like what a person scooping water up in their hand would do, what it would sound like, but a much larger scale. Sounded like something was scooping water up. We turned our flashlight over there, and these two big green eyes lifted up and were looking right at us. And my uncle, who was a grown man, I was a little kid, my uncle was terrified. We were like, what the hell is that? And he said, I have a rifle in the van, but he was too afraid to go up the hill to get his rifle out of his truck. We reeled up all our fishing tackle, just rounded everything up in our hands, didn't organize or anything, and we ran to the truck and got the hell out of there. And since that time, I have fished that lake several other times, and I have heard a very loud howl, if you will, that lasted anywhere from 20, 30, maybe even 40 seconds long, very long-winded. I've heard this during the day when I've been out there fishing in a boat back in the woods, and even out in the boat, it's not made me leave from fishing, but it's made me aware that there's something out there.
Now, this couldn't have been a coyote or a bobcat, because both can make strange noises.
Absolutely not. This is something with very large lung capacity and a very, very deep howl that was very loud. I haven't felt threatened down there in any way. I have not had anything thrown at me down there. There was just that one isolated incident where we saw that, and to this day, I don't see my uncle but maybe about every 6 months. And the first thing he says to me, remember when we saw Bigfoot fishing? It's the first thing he says to me every single time I see him. So,
unbelievable.
In his mental capacity, he's not in real good shape. He has some very serious health and mental issues, but he has a hard time remembering how to tie his shoes, but he still remembers that. That's the first thing he says to me every time I see him.
Incredible.
Or talk to him on the phone.
Incredible. The story that you tell about how everything got deathly quiet, that was our encounter when my boys and we were on vacation, and we were actually in the Pacific Northwest in the Olympia National Forest, and it was near Lake Crescent, which is near the northern border of Washington State. And this was in July. In Washington State, it doesn't get terribly hot. It was a cool evening, even though it was July. By cool, I would say maybe the low 60s, perhaps even the upper 50s. A beautiful evening. Not many clouds, but some. There was a moon that was hiding in and out of the clouds. And we went on a hike. We hunkered down. We were quiet and hoping we'd see something near the lake, hoping we would hear something, hoping something happened. But as we were there, we started to listen. I remember this is in the middle of July, the middle of summer, in the middle of the forest. And we heard nothing. And I mean absolutely nothing. There were no owls. There were no whippoorwills. There were no coyotes. There were no frogs. There were no crickets. It was dead silence. And the boys asked me, they said, "Dad, are we going to see a Bigfoot?" And I said, "Boys, I will tell you this. I don't think so, because I don't think he wants to be seen tonight. Because in this part of the country, he's at the top of the food chain. And when that's at the top of the food chain is nearby, those below him on the food chain are quiet. And do you hear anything at all?" And they said no. And I explained to them, while I don't think we're going to see Bigfoot tonight, there's a good chance, as we speak, Bigfoot is watching us. At that point, the boys were done. They wanted to go back to the cabin, so I obliged them and we left. So we saw nothing. But it was, when have you been in the woods on a July evening and heard absolutely nothing? I mean, this was doctor's office quiet. Absolutely nothing in the middle of the woods on a lake.
Right.
And I have to think, especially when I marry that with your story of how things got deathly quiet, that perhaps something was nearby, keeping an eye on us, or at least keeping us in check, or at least seeing what we were up to. I don't know that. I don't know that for sure. It's total speculation. But it kind of fits into your story as well. It matches together. It fits the scenario, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. And prior to seeing that eye shine and that rock being thrown at me that night, when I was further down the river, like I said, there was a pack of coyotes had gotten hold of something on the other side of the river over there.
Right.
I was hearing owls. It was still cool outside. You know, it wasn't it was probably about 35 degrees at that time. It wasn't freezing cold by any means, but, you know, you still hear owls, coyotes, you hear other animals. There's a lot of wild hogs down in that area. Also, something I forgot to mention about that property also, there are many skeletal remains of deer and boar wild hogs down there. And a few of the bones that I have come across were, now I don't know if they were struck by a car or a vehicle and somehow made it down to that piece of land and died there. But I've seen bones that were looked to have been broken or snapped. I've found several wild boar skulls down there. Some of them are quite large. One of them I took a picture of next to my boot, and it was about 4 inches longer than my boot. I only wear a 9.5, but it was still 4 inches longer than my boot. And also have found, again, I've come across probably skeletal remains of like 10 deer on that property as well.
So
sometimes they've been, you know, there would be nothing there, and then 2 or 3 weeks later, we go down there to hunt again, and there's just a skeletal remain left there. There's no meat left on the bones. I'm sure that there's plenty of other animals down there that will come eat on the carcass. We've seen bobcat, we've seen coyote. So I know there's plenty of stuff down there to scavenge off of that, but there's nothing left with skeletal remains, and it's just weird that there's so many of them in that one particular area.
In other words, they're a food source for something.
Very much so. I mean, there are a lot of deer, and there's a lot of wildlife in that area. And it's a great place to hunt. It's a beautiful place to be, but I believe that there's something there that's its home, and I don't think that it wants us there. But I'm going to continue to hunt there until it runs me off, or I run it off, or I get a real good photograph of it, or something. I don't know. I'm looking forward to this coming archery season. I can't wait to get back down there.
Well, I spend a lot of time, I try to get up there once a year in the Panamint Mountains in Death Valley in California. And that's a desolate area. You get up into the mountains off of the desert floor, even in the middle of the summer, it's quite cool because you're at elevation. You're at 12,000 feet.
Right.
And even at 9,000 feet where you're still below the tree line. But there have never been any Bigfoot sightings up there. And people have questioned me, well, this is a desolate area. Why are there no Bigfoot sightings? Well, the answer, of course, is there's nothing to eat.
Right.
And
no food source.
There's no food source. That's exactly right. In fact,
no shelter.
Well, there is shelter. There's a lot of trees there because it's a forest. It's above or below the tree line, but above the desert floor. But there really aren't many animals because they still don't get a lot of rain. So it's a lot of pinyon pines and trees like that. But there's not a lot of water. There's not a lot of rain. You get a lot of squirrels. You get small fox. But there's no wild boar. There is no deer. There's really nothing for a creature that's 7 feet tall to eat. I mean that's a big engine to stoke.
Right.
And if there's plenty of food source, it's like any place else. If there's plenty of food, there's going to be plenty of things to eat the food.
Absolutely.
That's where they go.
Absolutely.
A lot of questions have been asked. Okay, if there really is a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot, a wood ape, a skunk ape, whatever you want to call it, why no bodies? Why no skeletons? Why no real evidence on camera traps even? One theory is quite often when a creature like that, a Bigfoot, is spotted, quite often there are UFO sightings in the area as well, thinking that there could be another paranormal thing. Maybe the UFO has something to do with the Bigfoot. Maybe he's going in and out of a different dimension as to why we don't see them very often. Perhaps they're smarter than we think. Perhaps they're at least as smart as us. Perhaps they've been put there and then they're taken back. Did you see any UFOs during the time that you saw the Bigfoot or heard the Bigfoot?
No, nothing of the sort.
Nothing like that. So more like another form of wildlife than something paranormal in another way.
Yeah, no, I've heard that theory and seen many programs about it, but none of the two have ever, not in my few experiences, have I had anything like that going on, like any kind of UFO type of stuff or lights or none of that. It's always been a cold, not necessarily always cold, because the year that in Cape Girardeau, that was like in July that happened when my uncle, that was like in July of 1982, when we had that experience down there. And that time we actually, something else, another detail I forgot about that, was that the wind was coming across the lake directly in our faces, and there was a very, very strong, musty stink in the air when whatever this was came down the hill to get a drink of water. Clearly that's what it was doing. But there was a very heavy stink, musty smell in the air that was pretty overwhelming.
Unbelievable.
But as far as like lights or UFOs, nothing like that has ever been going on while the experiences that I've had. I haven't had the two together and the three experiences that I have had.